The Advent word for today is share. In yesterday's gospel, we heard about people asking John the Baptist what they should do in response to his preaching. In Luke chapter 3, verse 11, we hear, in reply, he said to them, whoever has two coats must share with anyone who has none, and whoever has food must do likewise. In today's reading from Paul's letter to the Hebrews, we hear, and do not forget to do good and to share with others, for with such sacrifices, God is pleased. These examples of how people share are pretty relatable. They sound like the way most of us approach sharing. We clean out our closets, give away our extra clothes. Maybe we donate food. We give financially to good causes. What I've noticed is that most of us share reservedly. We place rules and limitations when we share, deciding in very human ways that seem quite logical to us what should be shared and how, and who is worthy of receiving what we share, and in what ways recipients should use what we've shared. Think for a moment about some examples in your own experience. I know I've told some of you the story of volunteering in a food pantry at a church in another state with my young children and being told that I was a pushover because I let someone substitute out mayonnaise for mustard. The rules were no substitutions allowed. Nonprofits also may have rules and applications and processes that the recipients of our donations have to navigate in order to be beneficiaries of our sharing. And many of us worry about which charities will use our donations most efficiently or fairly. I know I've looked that up. Evelyn Underhill, the English spiritual writer and teacher, has helped me to shift my view. She wrote in The Fruits of the Spirit, if our lives are ruled by this spirit of Advent, this loving expectation of God, they will have a quality quite different from that of conventional piety. For they will be centered on an entire and conscious dependence upon the supernatural love which supports us. Hence, all self-confidence will be destroyed in them and replaced by perfect confidence in God. I wonder if our usual sense of sharing would look different if we let go of our own self-confidence and replaced it with perfect confidence in God. I understand that diligence in organizing and running a charity is necessary in order to make scarce resources go farther, to comply with laws, to be responsible stewards, etc. But like so many well-intended human things, I wonder if we have taken our own self-confidence too much for granted, and if we've taken our own tendency to judge, our own sense of rightness, diligence, and responsibility a bit too far. In the past year, I learned that much of the way that charity is structured, something I had confidence I could judge myself, has its roots in historical power imbalances, rooted in anti-Black, anti-immigrant, and anti-poor bigotry. All of this has led me to wonder, as I reflect on the way that God shares with us, if there may be different ways to share than what I've always thought was good. God shared all creation with us. God shared all of God's self with us. We humans have done our best to establish rules around that as well. Who gets to be part of our communities of faith? And in some denominations, who can receive communion or be married? But God again and again acts in the world to show us how God shares. When we see Jesus speaking with people society's rules said he shouldn't touch, touching and healing people society rejected, showing his disciples how sharing abundantly could feed people, caring without limits for people who are suffering, we see how God shares. Jesus's life and work show us. God shares without limits, with boundless compassion, with complete forgiveness and mercy. Jesus also teaches us, as we hear in his mother's beautiful song next weekend, that the order we've created in the world isn't God's order. God's order, the powerful are brought down and the lowly are lifted up. In light of all this, and in thinking more about which community-based efforts look more like what Jesus came to teach us, and less like a human hierarchy of right and wrong, rules and distinctions, and power imbalances. Last year, our family reassigned a portion of our annual sharing to mutual aid groups and an organization that provides cash with no strings attached to people in poverty. Yes, that's safe and effective, and there are hundreds of studies to back up this kind of direct giving. But more importantly, it resembles, in the same way that a shadow resembles a beautiful tree, but still there is a resemblance, the way that Jesus taught us to share. I'm not writing off other forms of charitable giving, but I am suggesting that it may be worthwhile to examine the ways that we share as we try to be more like Jesus, as we try to be the beloved community of God. Are there rules and restrictions that are rooted in historical injustices or prejudices that should be updated? How can we best respond to those? By asking questions, redirecting a portion of what we share, praying for softened hearts and open minds, educating ourselves, thinking about what it means to live in solidarity rather than just to give in charity. Trying to reframe what helping others means and how we go about it. The path to sharing as God shares is not easy, and we are not the first community of God's followers to stumble on it. Throughout history, the people of God stopped sharing again and again and rejected the prophets God sent to call them back into being a community that shared as God shares. As Verna Dozier wrote in The Dream of God, the biblical story is that God then entered into history to show the world in Jesus the Christ, the glory and the promise, the cost and the reward of life lived in absolute allegiance to a way that is not the world's way. And that, I think, is what we remember and anticipate in Advent, the cost and the reward of sharing in God's glory and promise. Amen. For those who might want to know more about mutual aid, I've shared a link to a visual history. And the first part of the visual history about mutual aid in America shows Absalom Jones and Richard Allen, who supported their community of Philadelphia during a yellow fever outbreak in the 1700s as an early example. I would also suggest that the early church might be a model of mutual aid as well. Have a wonderful rest of your Advent.